Rogue One is the first in a reportedly long line of Star Wars movies that is not about the traditional Skywalker saga. In doing so, it had the privilege and the responsibility of giving us an entirely new cast of characters to introduce and make us care for. I'll be taking a look at how I thought each of the characters fared in this movie. I liked Jyn Erso as a character. I thought maybe she had a bit too much of a chip on her shoulder, not that it's not deserved for all that she's been through, but that probably just has more to say about the oversaturation of these tropes in modern movies. I felt like she was believable in most of her reactions in these grandiose situations that would be difficult for anyone. Some say that her character may have been bland, but I thought she was a better developed character than Luke in his initial debut. Many heroes are less defined than the characters around them in order for the audience to project themselves onto them. And while this may have been somewhat the case for Jyn, I feel like she had enough of her own spirit that came through to make her an admirable role model. The Rebellion certainly seemed to think so. I do think that Rey made a better overall heroine, but it's great that the little girls are finally getting a heaping helping of heroes for them, like the boys have had for all these years. The only thing about her was that I wish she had more time to breathe throughout the story, which isn't so much a criticism of her character as it is the pacing of the story. By which, I mean she didn't really have much time to properly mourn her terrible temporary father figure in Saw Gerrera, but she was kind of mad at him, understandably. But even her actual father fell by the wayside. I feel like Felicity Jones could have really nailed an emotional, heart-wrenching scene, and while she did well with what she was given, I wish that they had given her more. But if the biggest criticism I have is that I was left wanting more, then all things considered, that's a pretty good way to end up. Cassian is a grizzled rebel intelligence agent, which for some reason makes him an ideal candidate for committing high-target assassinations. First of all, I love his mustache. Not that it's my personal style, but it's very clearly a 70s throwback, which makes sense because, as we've seen in the original, that seems to be the style in the galaxy at the time, so it's such a great touch of continuity. Anyway, onto his character. He didn't quite work as well for me. I know they wanted to make the rebellion not quite as squeaky clean as before, and present some kind of moral gray area, but all it did was make Cassian seem like a jerk. I have nothing against the actor, I just thought the character was not compelling and didn't really have a clear arc to me. Jyn's arc is very clear, but Cassian's is a little more murky. It may require additional viewing, but while Cassian was a fine character, he just didn't enthrall me. Then we have Cassian's partner, and the unofficial star of the movie, K2SO. K2SO is lovable while still being funny and useful in different situations. He's the snappy dialogue of C-3PO with the utility of R2-D2. We were wondering why we got BB-8 without another humanoid companion droid to keep him company, but K2SO made it worth the wait. I've been a fan of Alan Tudyk, who I've seen in person, by the way, ever since he appeared on Firefly. There were so many times that the whole theater was roaring with laughter from this one droid. It helped to make the experience even more enjoyable. And as the first of the heroes to sacrifice themselves for the cause, K2SO shows he's more than just the comic relief. K2SO is a fantastic addition to this movie, and is most definitely the droid we're looking for. Chroot and Bays are an interesting pair of characters, and add some variety to this story. I do like them both, but I feel they weren't given quite enough to do in the story, but I'm not sure that's their fault. It's hard to make up things for people to do when they don't belong. As I said, I do like these two. Chroot shows us how the Force can interact with someone who may not be Force-sensitive, like a Jedi, and Bays is essentially the human form of Chewbacca, which is one of the highest compliments I can give. But why are they here? They're not rebels, they're not even part of Saw Gerrera's rebel faction. So they just show up in Jedha City and get captured with our heroes. And don't get me wrong, it was really nice of them to give them a ride off-world when the whole thing was going up in smoke, but I can't figure out why they stick around afterwards. Surely the rebellion would want to debrief them and see if they would be interested in recruitment instead of letting them wander onto their base and then send them off to potentially be captured by the Empire. As I said, I like these characters, but I feel they could have been better served outside of this specific story. Maybe in their own movie. As I said in my initial review of the movie, I was not a fan of the Saw Gerrera portion. He was just too eccentric and confusing for his small part of the movie. He's a rebel, but he's not a rebel. He essentially raised Jyn but then abandoned her and doesn't even seem apologetic for doing so? He's one of the only two people in the galaxy to hear Galen's message and could tell other people what it said, but when it comes time, he decides just to chill out and wait for a big avalanche to take him out because it's too hard to run on his fake feet? Forrest Whitaker has done some good acting over the years, but even he couldn't make sense out of this character's purpose in the story. In a similar fashion, Galen himself seems slightly underdeveloped. I liked what he did when he was there, and his story is extremely interesting, but it's just most of what we know about Galen is told to us by others rather than letting him show us. I know this is to maintain a sense of mystery around him, and that's fine, it just means we aren't as emotionally connected to him when he finally shows up, only to leave us. Bodie, the former Imperial pilot, defects from the Empire to get Galen Erso's message about the impending terror to be unleashed on the galaxy to the Rebellion. My biggest problem with this character is Bor Gullet, the truth squid or whatever at Saw Gerrera's place. They say it'll tear apart the mind, and Bodhi seems affected by it for a couple of scenes, but then once they zoom out of there, he just seems to forget that he was supposed to be unstable and acts like a perfectly functional member of the team. Aside from that problem, though, we could have seen what it was like for people on the inside of the Empire, and what could shake them enough to make them decide that they had to leave from what they've been doing for so long. Bodhi, and Finn before him, both have promise to them, but have yet to reach that full potential to its fullest extent. Sadly, Bodhi won't get that chance, but there's still hope for Finn. Krennic was a decent enough villain. He was menacing at the beginning when he charged into the Erso homestead. Then in the middle he got a little mired down with the Imperial politics, but things picked up in true bad guy fashion when he took out the entire research team that was in charge of the Death Star for the leaked message. Maybe it was a little convenient when he happened to be on Scarif when the rebels planned to do their sneak attack, but how he took over the situation, both in the command room and personally, did work rather well, I think. He had a pretty cool cape to add to his uniform, which, if nothing else, makes him look more important. Ultimately, getting killed by the weapon you helped to create is a most fitting poetic justice. I guess that's what Tarkin gets for taking credit for the Death Star. Of course, everyone's been talking about CGI Tarkin, and there are strong feelings in both camps. I personally thought it was good, and let me tell you why. When I first saw Tarkin on screen, I knew that it wasn't the same guy because I knew that he had died, so I could tell that he looked different, but I was expecting that to begin with. At first I thought it was just another actor that they heavily make-upped to look like Tarkin, and that went on for a couple of scenes. I'm not sure when, but at some point I did realize that he was primarily CGI, and that's what made it good. If you don't immediately recognize something as computer-generated, then it's done its job of looking real. That's true of landscapes, vehicles, animals, and even people, so for me, Tarkin was good CGI. Unfortunately, the bad CGI came for me at the end of the film when Leia came out. At least I think it was Leia, it's really hard to tell. It just did not look like Carrie Fisher at all, may she rest in peace. Honestly, I'd be fine if in episode 9, they just said, "She's off on another planet, let's go have our own adventure," and not try and include her. Then there's the Dark Lord of the Sith himself, Darth Vader. Darth Vader was used sparingly in this movie, to great effect. For Rogue One, less really is more where Vader's concerned. We first see him in his lava-bound fortress, where, despite having just been helpless in a healing vat, he gives off a commanding and very imposing presence, to the point where even the well-spoken Krennic is found stumbling over his words. And then there's the end. If you watch this movie for no other reason, you need to see the last 5 minutes. The rebels have taken the plans and sent them to their friends, but the Empire shows up with reinforcements, headed by Darth Vader, and he's not having any of it. This one scene shows Vader being a monster and completely terrorizing all the rebels in his way with absurd ease. He's using the Force, using his lightsaber, using other people against each other. This scene reminded us why Darth Vader is considered the greatest movie villain of all time, and was the perfect way to use him in Rogue One and to round out the movie as a whole. Those are just some of my thoughts on the characters of this ambitious new entry in my favorite movie series. What did you think about the characters? Who were your favorites? Let me know down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you can become an Imperial today.